Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or perhaps you are listening to our sister station, WXND, at 100.9 on the dial. This is Artist Talk with LVA, and I'm your host, Keith Waits. And here we are talking today with Joey Yates. Joey is currently the curatorial director at KMAC, where he has worked as a curator since 2012. He earned his master's in curatorial studies at the University of Louisville, and he worked at both Land of Tomorrow Gallery, which some of us remember, that great little period, and has taught at Bellarmine University before he joined the staff at KMAC. And we're here today particularly to talk, but we may talk about other things. But KMAC Couture is April 16th, and this is the 10th anniversary edition of KMAC Couture. It features, I've got a whole list of artists here, but boy, it's a lot of people. So I'm not going to read that because that's really boring on the radio. So I'm sure in the course of our conversation, we will mention more than a few of these names. But Joey, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I always like to go back to the beginning on stuff like this. This is the first couture interview I've had. So let's start with, where does the idea come from 10 or 11 years ago or whatever it was when it was first born? How did that idea come about and come into being the first time?
So in 2012, when our former director, Aldi Milliken, was here, he kind of came in really with the sort of mandate of his own, but also I think from the board at the time to, reimagine the institution. And one of the ways that any museum will do that is certainly through fundraising efforts, not just programming, but how are we going to engage our donors and engage the community to learn about what the museum does. And we've been doing things like Art Car, Weekend, Day of the Dead, Bourbon Bash. And then we also had a yearly event around or on Oaks called Oaks Brunch. And it was a big event where all of our donors, our bigger donors, would come, but they would go to the Brown Hotel and they would have a seated, expensive brunch. And there would be some art auction materials like in the lobby before you came in, but essentially art was not the focus. It was just a brunch for people who went to the track. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the reimagining of the museum and the mission was to come up with something that would cement some of the new ideas that we had about the museum. And very quickly, he and a lot of people on staff and our board, a fashion show idea just started to emerge and materialize, as a way to still maintain a fundraising effort, get people to come for either a cocktail party or a dinner in the standard way museums sort of, engage their donors, but have some very art forward, art driven component. And it just seemed to be the obvious way. And then we enlisted a group of 5 people who we came to call the Fab Five, who really would teach us how to do this, like teach us how to put on a fashion show, because many of us had never done, a professional, runway fashion show that you might see in New York or Paris during a fashion week. And so we enlisted them, and they kind of helped get that first batch, because that first year we didn't do a call. Now we do a call. Every year we say, hey, we're doing KMAC Couture, who wants to participate? That year we really had to sort of curate the thing and invite artists, part of what the group did is they found that a lot of high school programs like Manual, for example, also already had some instruction or course in how to construct like an outfit or construct, a sort of sculptural wearable thing. And so we enlisted some high school students. So that first year really was a kind of labor of love with a committee and all hands on deck from the staff to create something. And that it was really successful that first year. We did it inside the museum in what little small area we could carve out. And the response was great. I mean, people loved it. And we were able to have from then on for the last 10 years, a kind of built-in system for how to do this every year.
Right. And then you moved that into the street at some point, right?
Yeah, because that first year we could only really fit seated indoors, like maybe 200 people, less than 300 at least. And so to grow the event we had to move. We had to figure out a way. And again, it was that kind of catch-22. The whole reason we wanted to do this event was to bring people to the museum and not the Brown Hotel, and to learn about art. So, but then we're like, well, we've already within 1 year kind of grown out of it in terms of the space that we have here. But the street seemed to be a good idea. You know, and a lot of fashion shows are held in tent, you know, in pop-up tent festival kind of atmospheres. So it made sense. So yeah, we ultimately were able to make an agreement with the city and our neighbors here on Main Street to let us do this every year. And so now it's a tent that essentially spans the length of the entire block from 7th to 8th Street on Main Street. And we get about almost 800 people now. We can get in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
But of course, when the pandemic happened, you didn't do it, right? In 2020, were you about to do it? Would have been close, right?
Yeah, no, we were, I mean, we do it every year, 2 weeks before Derby, 3 weeks before Derby, I think. And March, whatever 13th or whatever that was, things, you know, locked down, and we had already had everything in place for everything was done. We were ready to put on the show. And so the committee and everyone just had the idea to pivot to, you know, the artists already mostly made their their garments. And so we had some, and again, we had people on staff or our board who have some ideas of how to put together a production. And so we just pulled our resources and turned it into a film that first year. And then we did a film last year as well.
So this is the first time back on the street.
Right.
Since
2019.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's good. It'd be a shame to have the 10th anniversary not be on the street, it seems like.
Yeah, we made a big point of that. I mean, even the first film in 2020, it was just a kind of internet release. We just released it online. And so last year, at least we got to have a film premiere down at Repurposed here on Main Street, outdoors. So we were able to have at least a film premiere with a lot of people come. But this will be, so we made a big deal about last year that we're going to be back on Main Street for our 10th anniversary with a runway show. And obviously it's looking like, all things considered, we'll be able to do that. So
knocking on wood. I mean, we've been knocking on wood so much for 3 years, it seems like, right? But I think things are going your way this year. The numbers are there for it to.
Yeah, we're in the green currently, I think.
Yeah. So talk to me about who, because when we were setting this up, you were talking about how, I mean, you're the curatorial director, but there's a team of people here that are really crucial to it. So let's make sure we talk about that. Who's like in charge of this besides you? Like who's the top person or coordinator, or is there a team?
Yeah, there's definitely a team, but you know, part of that original Fab Five that I mentioned of people that really didn't have a big connection to the museum, they were just community members that we had contacts with, that our board had contacts with, that knew that could help us make a kind of template for this event. And one of those was Chris Thompson, and she ended up just sticking around the museum and came on to help with development and membership. So, but every year, because she's got the institutional memory of like how this event goes, she's very instrumental. She's an artist herself that participates every year. And so she just has a really good sense and a really good idea for how to structure this, the time frames the artists can work with. And then of course, over the years, we've had event coordinators, one of which we had Deontay Tenson was someone, and then Curtis Conlon was another events coordinator who really kind of took it to the next level in a way in terms of skills at party planning and event planning, and just the detail of things that need to happen for something like this to get pulled off in a day where, you know, at midnight, the night before, we block the street, The tent people come. I mean, it's an hour by hour, play by play for at least 24 hours. And usually that person sleeps here or at a hotel nearby so they can just sleep, change, come back on the street. And at 8 a.m., this person's coming by. At 9 a.m., this person's coming by and dropping off this and this and this. Because it's like putting on a one-day festival, you know. And so over the years, people like Chris and Curtis, our event planning team, have really been instrumental. And this year we have a new events coordinator. Her name is Megan, and this will be, you know, a kind of trial by fire. She's her first. She's never been to the event. She's never seen the event, and now she's sort of really the one planning it. But we have such good records from the past few years of people on staff who have done it, and of course. Myself, I've been here the whole time, and many of the other staff members have been here for 5-6 years. So we know the event. And of course, there are artists who return every year too that are very helpful and that know how this thing goes, and we can count on them to be mentors and like lead the people who it's their first time.
Well, it sounds like a well-oiled machine, but then you've got that fresh pair of eyes now.
Yeah, right. And I think that's important. I mean, any fundraising, any museum, you know, with yearly programming, normal programming, you want to be able to reimagine it without alienating the people that come to love it. And so that's a kind of, you got to navigate that, negotiate that how you can. But yeah, we do have new people here. You know, Aldi, our former director who helped start the event, he's gone. Our great event planners over the years who have had a lot of input into this are gone. So it is moving into a new era in a way, the event.
Well, it's always the question in Louisville is to keep talent here, you know, and it's sometimes difficult. So that's why you know, it's like I'm grateful that you've been here this long, and I'm always grateful when somebody like Shohei Katayama goes away and comes back, you know, because. But so when I look at this list, so there's a lot of names that don't immediately ring in my head. And I don't know, are there a lot of people that are fashion designers, or are the list of people coming in people who are creatives who are looking to do something different?
Yeah, I mean, you know, over the years, it's been what I call sort of one of the more diverse events, I think, anywhere. And by that, I mean just people from different skill sets, different generations, different backgrounds. And I don't think, because it started off, I mean, this is a good point, you know, that first year was really about a kind of unconventional, like found object sort of material craft project. It really wasn't about fashion design or, you know, your normal steps of pattern making and making a garment or something. We tried to immediately go for something kind of what I would call avant-garde, or just sculptural, you know. But over the years, one of the ways that we've kind of changed that up is just open it up. I mean, if you're a normal fashion maker, then fine, you know, make a pattern and make some great wearable, more functional piece. I mean, some of these things barely walk down the runway once, much less you'd be able to wear it again. And that's kind of the spirit of it. I mean, that's what I like about the sort of idea of art walks the runway. I mean, it's great if it only walks once ever, you know. It really is about performance art and sculpture. But it has become a platform. I mean, a lot of people, we get great photos every year for any artist, whether they're new or old, you know, amateur or seasoned. It's kind of a really good platform in terms of getting good photography, getting good exposure, having a good platform for your work. So it's taken on quite a bit of a, you know, variety of people who are interested in doing it, but it is not by any means a normal fashion show. You know, early on, we got some criticism about using the word couture, because, you know, couture and its or like haute couture in its foundation, its term is really, it's kind of like champagne. It can only come from this street in Paris. It is Chanel, it is Givenchy, it is, you know, it is these particular, this street in Paris with these houses, that's haute couture, you know? So it doesn't exist. It's like calling what we do champagne, and you can't, it can only come from Champagne, France. But the name KMAC Couture means that we're claiming it, you know, we're sort of taking it for ourselves and saying, well, yeah, sure, I get that, but this is KMAC Couture. This is our version of crazy, avant-garde, creative, outlandish things, whether it's made of, you know, dried vegetables and dried fruit, or if it's made from, you know, chiffon. You know, it doesn't matter what people use anymore. We just sort of claim it as part of, you know, the big wide net that represents art and craft at KMAC.
Right. Well, and it seems like it maybe what you're doing is it has a certain sort of egalitarian twist to the right, because although some of these people might be very, very talented, fabulous fashion designers, some of them, like you say, are doing things on probably a much more limited budget, so that they're not trying to live that New York or Paris couture.
Yeah.
They're living this couture, and it's
exactly right.
I love it's the whole thing about language, when we embrace a word and give it a new meaning. And of course, the people who hold it dear, I feel this way about bourbon in Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
You can buy bourbon can be made anywhere. I don't like that because I only want to drink bourbon from Kentucky.
Same.
But you know, it's the same thing. So I love that. I love that aspect of it. I don't know, when I've got the list of names here in front of me, and I do know something like Erin Reed I've known for years, and she's done it.
You mean like who's in it this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And and I know
I'm
more
not looking at that list, so I can't.
well, and I know Laura Patterson, who's an old friend of mine from high school. And you know, and I saw the video, you do videos on, I don't know if you did video on everybody, but there's the videos you've done on several people.
Yeah, right.
Hers is she's a teacher now, and she's she was the costume designer at Actors Theater once for 2 years.
Right.
But you know, the students are helping build hers, which seems to me exactly the kind of idea we're talking about, the sort of populist, if you will, idea.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we do a call, I think is for that reason. We want to find, you know, what's great is the way that we do this, the way the call is set up is that we put out the prompt. Usually the past several years, there's been a curatorial kind of prompt. And then they write a little artist statement about what they want to make and how they feel like it's responding to the curatorial statement. And honestly, the committee that comes in and kind of adjudicates that and decides, they really do read all those statements. I mean, over the years, our committee chair and the people that, you know, take their work for the museum and what they can contribute as a board member or as a you know, as a donor to the museum, they take that role very seriously, because a lot of people take KMAC Couture very seriously. So that rule and how the jury does decide this, I mean, people spend hours, they sit down, they read every artist statement, and they read about that. They read about what it is they want to make and who's going to help them make it, and why they want to be in the show. And sometimes, you know, they're pretty heartfelt stories. Like the garment is really an artwork that is personal. And I mean, it's a pretty serious endeavor in terms of how those are selected. And we do love to find, you know, a very kind of, sometimes they have a lot of human interest sort of components to them, like the people that make them, you know, husband and wife teams or whatever it might be. And that's kind of what we want out of the event. We want it to be it's a community art project in a lot of ways. I mean, so that is, and there are people that do return every year that I'm familiar with who I know they're always going to do something really good. And they become, you know, for the viewers, for the fans of this event that come every year, they look forward to see what that person's going to make again this year. And then we always have new people, you know, as well.
So is there a particular person who has been there all 10 years?
I don't think there's anybody that's been all 10 years, but, you know, early on we had artists like Maui Crane and Francis Lewis and a couple others, you know, who always made stuff every year and always knocked it out of the park, something really fabulous or really inventive. And then they each moved on and did some other things. Frances moved out west and had some other projects that she worked on that took up some professional time. And Maui, of course, moved on. But then someone like Wendy Cudmore came in, who every year started making these amazing these like garments out of pressed vegetables and fruit. And she makes a new invention every year. And so, and yeah, there's people like someday I should have pulled out a list, but there are some new, Bree Bowers has made some amazing work over the years, repeatedly. Yeah, I'll try to come up with others, but I mean, there are lots of artists who
I think you're better off not having the list in front of you, because then it sort of relieves you of the responsibility of
yeah, right.
you have to remember every single name.
I'm not looking
I
at
don't
it right
expect.
now, and I've got we're taking down our former show and putting up a new show, and so my mind is not retaining names this week, but there are very inventive, clever artists here that participate, if not every year, frequently, who just always make the best work.
Right. Well, I know Aaron Reed, who
Yeah.
I've worked with as a friend, has done it. I'm not 10 years, but several times.
Yeah, Ed Taylor is somebody else, I think, who's done work several times. It's always some super fantastical, amazing thing. Yeah, and Aaron Reed, right.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. You mentioned taking a show down, putting a show up. Let's take a minute to talk about. You mentioned before we started recording that you have because this is the 10th anniversary. You have sort of a retrospective exhibit, and that is a thing you are curating specifically, correct?
Yeah, well, Chris Thompson's going to help me. We've got a few people who've kind of put their input into that. I've actually, probably contributed to the least, but it's a show that I wanted to do, and because it is one of those events that does require our entire staff. So I wanted so every year, all the staff, we all stop what we're doing and we do this event.
Right.
And so I wanted the exhibition to kind of have that same sort of feel, that this is, something we all thought about. But on a personal level, we do a little bit of a showcase every year where we present, like in our lobby, about 10 looks from the runway show. And they're up for about a month in the summer, just so it can kind of carry on. We don't, given our program and the size of our museum, I can't dedicate an exhibition every year to it. So some of these, periodic larger shows that can happen every 5 or 10 years or something, depending on how long we continue to do this, is something that I did want to do. And so at the 10-year mark, I thought, okay, sure, let's carve out some time within our normal exhibition schedule to really present these in a way that, to the best of our ability, connects it with some of those great fashion exhibitions like you might see at the Met. Obviously, we're not spending that kind of money, but give it that kind of treatment, so that some of these garments that can last a little bit longer, because we've got work from the first years. We've got work that's like 10 years old that's been able to survive, because some of this stuff's made out of paper and very ephemeral.
That's what I was thinking. You were talking about the less than archival quality of some of the outfits.
Oh yeah. And so the fact that we are able to get some of that for this exhibition, I thought, well, this is the year to do it. Let's do it. And I'm sure we'll do one in another few years again. But so we're preparing for that, and that is going to be a little bit of an ambitious installation, because I do want to give these these garments, like the best platform we can give it. The way that we would give any good exhibition that we do, that kind of treatment. So we've got that work to do simultaneously, because that's going to open the night on April 16th. After the show is over, people can come into the museum for like an after party, and that will be on display. So
I think it's such a perfect idea. Of course you should do it. If you didn't do it, I'd be wondering why you didn't.
People would, right.
Yeah. 10.
Right. 10.
And then after 10, you can always do 15. Those are those magic numbers, 15, 20, 25, 30.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. So I think how fashion and visual art merge is sort of obvious if you just think about it for even a few seconds. But over the course of 10 years, what do you think couture has, how has it commented on that relationship or pushed that relationship, or what has it taught you about that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think I've always been interested in, I mean, just fashion or clothing design or that separate from like, well, I don't think it's separate from my interest in art or performance or music or anything else, but it does hold like a separate interest for me, or an additional interest, because we're by no means like a fashion museum or a textile museum or anything like that. It's not like there's any real reason why this should be a focus. It just so happened that it's turned into something that the museum does talk about a lot. So,
Well, it's a good idea, and you thought of it first. That's
yeah. So right. So it has been something I've thought about in concert with one another more than say I did before I came here. But yeah, it's a beautifully evolving sort of space in our culture. I mean, the way art and fashion. I mean, I think a lot of designers probably came out of an art background or interested in art, or even to this day rely on artists for inspiration, while they might also rely on film and other things in pop culture. I mean, fashion is just one of those pop culture kind of always evolving, always changing elements that we all observe and participate in at some point. Even our non-participation in it is participation in it in a way. It is a, so I think it just sort of makes sense that museums, particularly a museum like ours, which does have this sort of legacy or this history of thinking about craft and design, that we continually think about it. In answer to your question, I'm not really sure that the artists themselves, at least, and I'm only now thinking about this because you asked, I'm not so sure that every year I see or I notice something that I couldn't have seen a year before, or the year before that, or the year before that. For example, there's always some classic forms or classic silhouettes, that walk every year. That silhouette, maybe it's some crazy material or something, but for the most part, you could have done that in an avant-garde show in the 50s, or could have done that in an avant-garde show in the 60s. So it's hard for me to kind of really gauge in the context of our event what is always like the most, say, current thing that's combining art. I'm sure there are, and I'm sure, and I wish I did know, because I bet you there are designers who are thinking very, very, very like sort of cutting edge, for lack of a better word, about what they're doing. But many of them, I think, do come at it from not a historical, but a kind of a place where they're referencing something that they've seen or that is classic or people can be familiar with. Like, for example, one kid, and he was a kid, I think he was still in high school at the time, he literally made a dress out of, garbage. It was cigarette butts, garbage, like, potato chip bags. It was hideous, but the way it's styled, the way it walked down the runway was really beautiful. It looked like some Vivienne Westwood thing, like she would have made for the Sex Pistols or something. And when I first saw it, I thought, well, I love this guy. I love this kid's spirit. This is really cool. But, oh God, this thing, I'm not so sure. But when it walked, I was like, man, I could have walked in like a punk fashion show in 1979. It was that good. So I think that those types of, and maybe I'm just not the best person to ask that question, because I'm always thinking about references. Like, not that I'm a jaded like art curator person, that I refuse to think someone's going to show me something new. That's not true. I'm always wanting to be surprised, but for the most part, I get excited by the way people are bringing art and this event and fashion together in ways that, yeah, maybe I've seen references to. And that's not to say there aren't things that walk down the runway every year that don't just blow me away, that like, oh, wow, that's really inventive or really new. I'm just not necessarily able to like, bring them to mind right now, but but
Well, no,
yeah.
I just wondered about that, because it seems like that strikes me that that's sort of the opportunity in this event.
Right.
Um, but I mean, I guess I was hoping maybe you had some sort of big profound thing, but but I also understand what you're saying, that the profundity is that for 10 years it succeeds maybe in the same ways.
Right. Yeah.
That it hasn't gotten stale as an
It hasn't
event,
gotten
or and
stale.
the
And I
artist
think,
works. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure the first year or two we thought like, are we gonna do this in 5 years? Because a lot of fundraising projects like this can kind of be like Groundhog Day. It's like, okay, we've done this
Right.
before, we've seen this before. And the fact that we do have some of the same artists in the show, but you know, and that's one of the reasons I think the curatorial prompt sort of happened. I'm not saying that, the curatorial prompt isn't always adhered to as well as I would like. Some artists just like go rogue and say, I'm making this. And then it becomes my job or our job to sort of figure out how it fits. And that's okay, that's part of the curator's job. But I think that has helped it keep it a little fresh in terms of, while a lot of our prompts aren't typically, they don't have anything to do with art or fashion. Like, one year, the star stuff, we thought about cosmos, and we thought about, think about that space and the universe, in terms of your response to this theme. But last year I did try to come up with a theme. It was Beauty and the Beat. And the idea was that music is also this, I think, kind of trinity when it comes to fashion and art. It sort of forms in my mind. It's like opera, opera is this great art form, or ballet, where you're really talking about music, dance, and costume, and all these things come together in a production. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do last year with Beauty and the Beat, was give the artists some room to think about how what they might make might encompass all of that sort of art and music. I mean, got some really good responses that year from that too. But again, they're thinking about genre a lot of times, like something punk rock or something goth or something, what have you. But not to say that we don't have people who are really thinking about contemporary culture and respond every year into some new way where they're bridging the two in a way that, I haven't seen before.
Well, I can't imagine. It's hard to imagine a walk down the runway without music. So you're absolutely right about that Holy Trinity.
Oh yeah.
And I always feel, it's kind of like when you talk about how tuned in the artists are to popular culture or the zeitgeist. I learned that word in art school.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I always feel like if they're not, I mean, can you be an artist at all? Can you be a creative and not be paying attention and tied into all those things? So it makes perfect sense that they would.
I don't think you can be a good contemporary artist.
Yes.
And not be tied in. I think there's a lot of people who are perfectly great technicians and craftspeople, and they toil away in sort of obscurity, and they become masters, at what they do. And it may or may not have a connection with what's going on in the larger world, but it doesn't lessen the fact that it's like a really great thing that they make or that they do. But I think to be what I would call a contemporary artist means that you are participating in sort of what makes our culture now have a certain distinction from other cultures or other time frames or the periods or what have you. You're engaging with like the living population to make something that speaks or is relevant in some way.
Right. And I can think of, like, in ceramics, like a functional potter may or may not.
Yeah, right.
They may be making the most excellent, beautiful, sturdy,
Right.
functional vessels.
Yeah.
And but they're not necessarily. But then a ceramic artist who's doing sculpture or different kinds of things, they're working with the same medium, but that's that separation. I think it's very clear in clay in that way. You can sort of break it down.
No, it's true. I mean, there are some mediums out there that they're so grounded in tradition, or I mean, ceramics, one of the oldest one of the oldest art forms, so that we have, and a lot of people get interested in it for that reason, because they're interested in working with dirt, the most basic material, most basic thing to make a perfectly functional object, that is just pure and pristine in some way. I think, but yeah, and I'm not even saying it's a requirement for good art, but there's a lot of bad contemporary art. So it's not by any means like a qualitative thing that a person has to be aware of what's going on. I will say in KMAC Couture, it's probably one of the sort of signature aspects of it, though, like, because it is sort of an avant-garde challenge, and avant-garde means the front. It means, the things that are in the front, things are at the forefront of what's happening. And so that is part of the spirit of the show, in a way, is to surprise people, and not to have, 1940s ball gown. Well, as beautiful as that might be, it's not.
Right. We're not looking for nostalgia.
Right. No. Yeah, it's supposed to be a fun sort of, radical show.
So let me ask you this sort of random question. And look at this list of artists, and I told you I didn't know some of the names, but I'm assuming they're not all necessarily based in Louisville, correct?
It's probably 90%. And then because it is based on a call, that call can oftentimes reach beyond, Louisville. People might see it, or friends might send it to them. But there's not a whole lot of artists. I mean, I could probably only count on one hand the number I don't think live in the region. And one woman I know lives in Columbus, Ohio, but that, again, there's not a whole lot. And some artists are involved who are from Louisville, but they don't live here anymore, but they're going to participate and send their work or fly here with their work or whatever. But it's mostly 90 to 95%. I mean, artists based here in the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask you is, who's the furthest artist? Like, where's the furthest point that an artist is coming from?
Well, I mean, Frances, she's still based in Los Angeles now. So she's coming in to kind of finish her work and present and be here for the night of, and then she's going back to Los Angeles. But again, she's, she went to U of L, she's from here, and she's, Columbus, Ohio. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure who else is coming from too much further. There's a couple students that went away to college, and I think that they're making work. And I think they, like Molly Inzer, the twins, I believe that I can't remember where they went to school, but I don't think it's very far away, Ohio. But they've been involved since they were in high school, and now they're gone up to college, but they still want to participate in the event. So, but there's not a whole lot of representation of people from too far outside our borders.
Okay, but Frances gets the award for probably longest journey this year.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm also interested, in the last 2 years, talking to all sorts of different people, Robert Barry Fleming had brought this up, that this embrace of different technologies and different ways to approach things, and the opportunities it gives organizations to connect outside of their region, that you can now people are used to doing a lecture on Zoom instead of having to fly to London. There are these different kinds of opportunities. So I know you're excited to be back on Main Street. But have you, and I know this will be documented, photographed and everything, but have you given much thought to the idea of not abandoning entirely, sort of like a filmed version, that somehow there's a way you might bridge both of those kinds of approaches in the future?
I mean, we definitely learned a lot these past 2 years making films, and we had some success with it. And it does imagine these artworks in a different context than just a runway. And so there's definitely been a benefit to that. But, and I don't know if this is going to totally answer your question, but, there's probably never going to replace, we had, in terms of a fundraising event, a lot of people whether it's sponsors or whether it's donors, they don't really want to participate in quite the same way if we're not going to have this event where we have for 3 hours undivided attention of a lot of people from the community. I mean, that's kind of why a lot of people participate in events like this. Whereas you rarely have people's undivided attention on the internet. I mean, that's the internet means, if it translates to anything, it means like fractured attention span. So I think for us, there's really never going to replace the one-on-one relationship people have with art, and the kind of we think that's what we put our stock in, that transformative experience of experiencing art in person. Like that's too much a part of our DNA. I don't know that we'll ever go back on that. What we've learned, I guess the problem is that what we have learned and the benefits of online, digital, technological kind of work, I think the problem is that takes like almost more staff people to do. Like, I'm not necessarily the most tech savvy person. So that's another hire, a person to come in and do work for, and so we only have so much bandwidth to both do what we think is our job, is to bring people and art together in person. And then it becomes like a whole new staffing component, like, financial commitment, to then have also this additional experience, online. And I think people that have had successes of doing that, I think probably already had those in place. I know lots of museums over the years had already had really good digital content or online content. And then the pandemic happened and they were able to sort of pivot a little more quickly because they had some of those structures in place or some of those staff people in place or what have you.
Right.
We would have to, and while we've had some success, our education team has been like really probably the best at this in terms of creating like mobile experiences or online experiences. But even they, I think, are like, okay, kids are starting to come back to the museum. People are starting to come back to the museum. We've got to get back to doing what we were normally doing because we don't really have the staff or the bandwidth to keep doing both. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what that looks like yet.
So yeah, so some institutions maybe had the funding in place to have full media departments for years and years, and so they were able to do that. No, I totally get it. I do find that a lot of times people think, they'll just say like, "Oh, why couldn't you just film it and video it? And why couldn't you just do it?" They think somehow it's very simple.
Yeah, right.
You can do it all with your phone or whatever. I think they underestimate the amount of work behind that. But I just wondered if you had seen like a different sort of value in that. And I think it's a question it's a question I have for like everybody in all sorts of fields right now.
There's definitely value in it. I think it's a great way to interpret material. People don't always get to, I'll give a tour to anybody that walks in the museum that I'm available to give a tour to. If you can't experience that, then I do think that either artist tour or a curator tour or some kind of tour online or some kind of interpretation for people that can't come to Louisville even, all that is very important. I just don't think every museum is equipped to be able to do that consistently all the time, unless you kind of already have that in place. It is something we're thinking about and we're going to do. We're probably going to implement it because the fact is we're probably going to be in this situation again in our lifetimes, if not soon. So we've definitely learned a lot and we have the tools to be able to do it. It's just now we're sort of, because we're a nimble kind of small institution, we've just got to pick up the pieces and kind of do what we know or what we're strongest at, while trying to maintain some of what we learned. It's just not going to be as quick of a pivot as some people could do, but
Well, and I didn't mean by asking the question to suggest that that an online version replaces it, but put it augment it or take it, be a way to take it out to other parts of the world. But what you don't want is for people to think like, oh, I don't have to go down and sit in the den. I can watch it here.
Exactly.
It's like blocking out the local game to the media, right? So everybody will buy tickets to go.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you said it. That's why we try to we in order to kind of get back to where we were with the success of this event, we just really want to focus on putting on an event again.
Right.
But I do think before it's all over, we'll be able to produce some more content that's like what we did with the films. I'm just not so sure what that looks like just yet, but
Sure.
I hate to say that's either or, but at this point it kind of is.
Well, we spent so much. We all spent so much time figuring out how to survive for 2 years, and it seems right to come back and kind of just relish the in person again. And I'm a big proponent. I've said it on this show so many times. If there's anybody who's ever listened to it, you got to get into the room, and never ever think that you really are seeing and understanding work because you can see it online. It's a nice way to find out and discover things, but hopefully, so you will then go to get in the gallery and in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I've met strangers at museums before. I mean, you start talking or you're there. I mean, it's just the way. It's kind of like I use the example, Extreme Library, they have that now, like robotic retrieval system for books. I don't know. I remember when as I was leaving, they had come up with that, where like you get on the card catalog, you find your book, you go ask the clerk for the book, they put the book in, this arm goes into the stacks, and they like bring the book back and they give it to you. And I remember when the first time that happened, it's like, okay, but that just like destroyed my research, because usually I go to a section of the library and look, there's 10 books next to this book, and I didn't know about it. And all of a sudden I've grabbed all 10 books and I go to a table and I'm looking at all 10 books. You don't do that. I mean, you don't, there's not those associations or those connections with like other things in the room that really inform you just as much as the one object or one thing you were looking at. Of course, you're getting information out of that, but that's just not the way I think, human development or human conversation. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't really great dialogues and conversations that happen online, but there's just a way to doing things in reality that really push the story or forward, and it's hard to capture that. You lose something. I don't know, and I don't know.
Well, it's everybody thinks the Mona Lisa is this great. And I think everybody pictures
right. A good example.
Large, and you get there and it's like tiny.
Whole thing, and you can't even And the Mona Lisa came up the other day in another conversation. You can't even look to this. You can't even look to the side. I mean, you only get this one look of it.
Yeah.
Unlike another artwork where you can sort of walk around it or kind of have it from different angles. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, yeah, you got to go in person to see stuff as much as possible.
Well. Joy, I think it's about time to wrap it up. So thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll do it again. Maybe just for no reason and just talk about Louisville artists or something. But
yeah, we could do that, definitely.
Yeah, but we're here specifically to highlight the fact that KMAC Couture, the 10th anniversary edition of KMAC Couture, is April 16th, and you can go to is this KMAC.org? Are you guys.org?
KMAC Museum, KMACmuseum.org.
.org. Okay. The thing about the search engines are so good. If you just type in capital KMAC, you're going to get there.
Probably, eventually. Yeah.
You'll get there. So tickets are available. It's back out on the main street again. And so you shouldn't miss it, I guess, right?
No, don't miss it. If you can come. And if not, come to the exhibit, this summer.
Yeah, and then you'll realize that you should come next year.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Joey.
Okay. Thank you.